She'd obviously have been a prime target for anything we could do, ranging from special forces to Balkan bombers.
But before the Belgrano was deployed to Stanley, she had one more mission at sea, an attempt to catch the task force in a pincer. The Belgrano on one side and Argentina's aircraft carrier, the 25 de Mayo, on the other.
The Navy tried to attack on the first day in the afternoon. It tried the pincer. The planes were ready on deck, ready to begin to attack.
Unfortunately, something happened. Something that is not unique, but doesn't happen very often. The wind died down, and it was impossible for the planes to take off from the carrier. The planes were loaded with enough ammunition. Therefore, a serious strike on a British ship was a real possibility.
Without the wind in their favor, and with their aircraft fully loaded with ordnance, there was a real risk that the planes would not be able to make it to the target and back.
This meant they had to start unloading some fuel or weapons off the planes. And that meant the carrier had to get closer to its target, so planes could make the return flight with enough fuel. And it was then, when they were getting closer, that a British reconnaissance plane detected the Argentine task group that was furthest away. The surprise element, which was vital in our attack on the British forces, had disappeared.
By the time the Argentines had abandoned the attack, it was too late. One of the British nuclear subs, HMS Conqueror, had spotted the Belgrano and fired a couple of World War II-era torpedoes and sunk it. Along with the Belgrano, 323 lives were lost, over half of the Argentine casualties in the entire Falklands conflict. It was the single largest loss of life of the war, and a crushing blow for Argentina. It meant withdrawing the rest of the naval fleet. The admirals were not willing to risk losing any further ships.
It was a great delight to us to find that the Argentinian Navy returned to harbour and didn't venture out in any force at all again. That gave us a great advantage. And had they decided to send it out in a major attack, obviously using all the air power they could, it might have been very serious for us.
Instead, 2 old torpedoes sidelined an entire navy. But even without the Belgrano, the Argentine Navy could have inflicted serious damage on the task force. But the fight seemed to have gone out of it.
Take away the Belgrano, it could still be done. But their determination had completely disappeared.
It was left to Argentine air power to strike back. The day after the Belgrano was sunk, an Argentine Exocet missile hit the British destroyer Sheffield. The war was not over yet. On the night of the 20th of May, the British sailed through San Carlos water and into San Carlos Bay to land the main body of Marines. It was a hugely risky operation. They had no idea if the Argentines had mined the approach. Once again, the Argentines had a chance to stop the British in their tracks. This is the story of how Argentina could have won the 1982 Falklands War. The steps leading to this outcome did not happen, but they could have, and very nearly did. For the first time, top British and Argentine commanders reveal key steps that could have led to British defeat. On the night of the 20th of May, British forces began the amphibious stage of their campaign to retake the Falkland Islands. The Argentines could have stopped them without firing a shot had they mined the entrance to San Carlos Bay.
I don't think we could have done anything, actually, because the minesweepers would have been blasted out of the water by the aircraft. I don't think we would have got anywhere.
Imagine the chaos that will affect, depending which three they are. If it's a headquarters ship, you've lost your headquarters. Mines sink ships. And we'd probably have to turn around and come home. The only way to do it was to send a ship in the hope that if they had laid mines there, it would hit one and we'd then know about it.
We had 37 mines in the Falklands. They were useful for mining the entrance to the harbor, but they were so few.
A few mines were placed at the entrance of Stanley Harbour. The Navy did not have any mines, just a few units from before the Second World War.
With so few mines and so many island ports to defend, Argentina tried to anticipate where the British would land and place the mines in these key strategic locations. It wasn't an easy call.
I remember telling the commanders-in-chief during their visit that the Falklands had at least a dozen places where landing was perfectly viable, and that it all depended on what the British decided to do.
We reckon that they would be clearly mining and covering the various beaches close to Stanley, which they had used on their initial assault. So we worked our way further back and ended up at St. Carlos. Now, St. Carlos, to me, offered most. It was deeper water. We could get ships, quite large ships, into this area. So St. Carlos fitted quite a lot of the arguments.
But the British, of course, still didn't know if the Argentines had placed some of their precious mines in San Carlos water.
I rang up the captain of Alacrity and said, I'd like you to go through the Falkland Sounds and go in the southern end and come out the northern. And he said to me, well, I expect you'd like me to go in and out of the northern entrance a few times. I hadn't told him I was checking for mines. He'd instantly sussed it out. And I felt deeply ashamed of myself for not having been straight with him, because that was exactly what I wanted, and he knew precisely what was wanted, and that's what he did.
Naval intelligence said that the British would never be able to land at San Carlos because they would not place their fleet inside the strait, as that would expose them too much to an Argentinian attack, so that area was not mined.
The British landing began at San Carlos on May the 20th. Britain waited for Argentina's response. It was a crucial moment. A large amphibious operation is at its most vulnerable in the first hours of landing. This battle for San Carlos between Argentine air power and British ships and pilots would be key. And Argentina came far closer to winning than anyone realized at the time.
I understand that the Argentinians thought that our landing was only a feint when it arrived at San Carlos, and that's great because it's exactly the sort of thing we would want them to think, and it enabled us to get it built up and pretty proof against counterattack before anything happened. And there never was a counterattack on it, of course, except from the air.
There's no doubt in anybody's mind that if you wish to conduct a landing, you need at least what you might call an adequate air situation. That doesn't mean total air superiority, but enough to effect a landing without too many casualties.
The British knew that this was their most vulnerable time. Even though the aircraft carriers were close to the battlefield, they had far fewer planes than the Argentines, who had cannily held back their air force till this moment.
I was very worried that the Argentine Air Force, based on their mainland air bases, were only 350 miles away, would wreak havoc on the amphibious force, particularly at the time when we were approaching and during the offload.
Now, on the day of the landing, all the landing ships were in Carlos water, and most of the escorts were outside. And of course, that's in one of the more open water, easier to see, so they were the ships that were attacked.
Argentine pilots lacked